Welcome everybody to this webinar about the USD Prescribing Research Network's Pilot and Grant Planning Awards. This is information for potential applicants. I'm Dr. Amanda Mixon, and with me is Dr. Sandra Simmons and Joanna Gupta, and we lead the pilot core for the network. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things. You're welcome to place questions in the chat or in the Q&A as we go along, and then we'll answer questions at the end. We have no relevant disclosures. We'd like to thank, of course, the National Institute on Aging for funding the network, our Scientific Advisory Board for all the advice they've given us over the years, and the people listed here, particularly Joanna Gupta, Raha Shahrudi, and Jonathan Norton for their help in everything related to the network. So what is the USD Prescribing Research Network, or USDeN? Well, formally, it's the entities you see here, led by Dr. Cynthia Boyd and Dr. Mike Steinman. It's also all of you who are part of the community interested in deprescribing. The red box highlights how our pilot and exploratory studies core relates to the other cores in the network. USDeN focuses our activities around 5 pillars, which include the investigator development core, stakeholder engagement, data and resources, several working groups, and then finally, funding for pilot studies and grant planning awards, which is what we'll be discussing today. As I mentioned, Dr. Simmons and I co-lead this core. I'd like to note that all the information presented today is also available on the USDeN website, which I'll share later. The purpose of the pilot and grant planning awards are to support early stage career research in deprescribing that will likely lead to larger projects. The funding of pilots will primarily but not exclusively be awarded to junior investigators, while grant planning projects will be mostly awarded to more senior or established researchers. The projects can provide preliminary data, proof of concept, or developmental work that clearly leads to future larger scale studies. There are 2 funding mechanisms in our core, the pilot awards and grant planning awards. The website is listed here for your reference, and I'll discuss each of these awards in turn. So to start with is the scope of the pilot awards. Projects should first have a direct and clear relationship to deprescribing. One definition of deprescribing is on the following slide, but there's no need really to parse the language precisely. It's really applying common sense to what is deprescribing and what is clearly related to it. Second, it needs to be relevant to the care of older adults. There's no fixed definition of what an older adult is, but it should be reasonable and relevant to aging. And third, it should demonstrate a clear pathway for how the proposed research will lead to something bigger, i.e. a future grant and research opportunities related to deprescribing, career development that will allow the investigator to embark on a sustained research career with a focus on deprescribing. So as far as a formal definition of deprescribing, we like this one from the University of South Australia, in which it says, deprescribing is the process of withdrawal, dose reduction, or substitution of inappropriate, that means high risk, unnecessary, or low benefit medications by healthcare professionals with the goal of managing polypharmacy relevant to those without polypharmacy and improving outcomes. And we've provided the definition at the website as well. So currently, we are soliciting submissions for our 4th cohort of pilot and grant planning awards. And this year, as in last year as well, we have 3 priority areas which we would like to fund. One is deprescribing in a variety of care settings, such as home health and hospice. Point of care tools that help clinicians, patients, and caregivers to discuss stopping or reducing medications, and patient-important outcomes in deprescribing. New for this cycle, we have we will be funding 1 application along with the Aging Initiative. The proposal will be one that focuses on both deprescribing and multiple chronic conditions in older adults. If you mark your proposal in the submission process as being eligible for consideration for this award, it will undergo a joint review by the USDeN as well as the Aging Initiative leadership. You can apply for both our award as well as the Aging Initiative Pilot Award, but you may not receive funding from both organizations. And to learn more, you're welcome to click on the links at the bottom of this slide. So just to give you a little bit more information about what we consider multiple chronic conditions, the Aging Initiative has provided this quote for us. It's really around understanding populations with complex high need and high cost individuals, many of which are elderly or older adults. And really this is to lay the groundwork for understanding how to create effective interventions for multifaceted needs of these individuals. And it's important to understand the extent to which these studies can address specific aspects of care and especially outcomes for medically complex individuals. And this quote is from a JAGS article from a few years ago that we have the link in at the bottom. So I'd like to review the projects that we funded so far in the prior 3 cohorts to give you an idea of what we're interested in. In our most recent cycle, we had 19 applications and we funded 5 awardees. There were 2 applications for grant planning awards, but we did not fund any of those. And we had 17 applications for pilot projects and 5 received funding. In our first year of pilot awards, we had 3 pilot grant recipients. The first was Greg Hewlett at Yale, who examined decisions about anticoagulation for patients with atrial fibrillation and dementia. Dr. Ariel Green and Dr. Nancy Schoenborn at Johns Hopkins University was studying older adults' attitudes and preferences around discussions of deprescribing. And finally, Jennifer Kuntz at Kaiser Permanente Northwest looked at intensification and de-intensification of diabetes medications in older adults with multimorbidity. In year 2, we had 6 awardees. And to give you more detail about those, there were 4 pilot awards that year. The first was Dr. Justin Lee at McMaster University, who was piloting an intervention to improve medication deprescribing for vulnerable hospitalized older adults. Dr. Josh Niznik at the University of North Carolina looked at deprescribing bisphosphonates in nursing home residents with dementia. Dr. Scott Pilla at Johns Hopkins University conducted a national survey of physician perspectives on deprescribing diabetes medications. And finally, Dr. Sarah Vordenberg at University of Michigan looked at the psychological and clinical factors that predict intent to deprescribe for older adults. And during that cohort, we also awarded 2 grant planning awards. The first was given jointly to Dr. Ranjit Singh and Dr. Bob Waller at the University of Buffalo, who together led a patient-driven deprescribing intervention to enhance successful aging so that they could apply for an R21/R33 grant. And secondly, Dr. Sarah Zanton at Johns Hopkins University looked at goal-directed deprescribing and its effect on self-management in community-dwelling older adults with multimorbidity. This past year, we awarded 5 pilot awards and no grant planning awards, as I had mentioned. The first was from Dr. Maria Papaleontu at the University of Michigan, who is looking at deprescribing a thyroid medication in older adults with dementia. Dr. Minji Kwok at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston is looking at the intensity of heart failure pharmacotherapy among older adults. Dr. Nagam Alabuni at the University of South Australia is our international awardee for the year and is studying empowering older people living with dementia and their caregivers to initiate deprescribing conversations by developing the PRIME tool. Additionally, we have Dr. Xinzhen Wang at the University of Rochester, who's investigating an interdisciplinary intervention via telehealth to address home health care needs. And Dr. Matthew Dupree at Brown University is looking at novel methods for estimating the effects of deprescribing using observational data. We're very excited to be working with this newest group of bright young investigators. So we do ask for feedback from our awardees, and here are just some selected quotes about the utility of working with both us as the core, but even more widely as USDeN. So now I want to tell you a little bit more about the application process. To begin with, I'll start with eligibility criteria for the applicants. So applicants should hold a doctoral degree. They must be employed as a faculty, research scientist, or an equivalent by the start of the award period, which would be next summer. They must work in a setting such as those listed here, which is registered with the System Award Management. And lastly, each applicant can submit one application. However, 2 or more individuals from the same institution can apply. Applicants can be from non-US institutions, but you must articulate how the proposed research will apply outside the home country, including the United States. We encourage applicants from underrepresented groups, disadvantaged backgrounds, and individuals with disabilities. So now I'll talk about the available funds. Each award is up to $60,000 in total costs, which includes both direct and indirect costs. The indirect costs charged by the recipient institution's federally negotiated rate. Foreign entities can charge no more than 8% of modified total direct costs. Each year will begin in August or September of next year, and the funds can be used for approximately 1 year. Each year, we plan to award between 3 and 6 projects with a combination, hopefully, of pilot as well as grant planning awards. Now I'll talk about each funding mechanism. So first is the pilot awards, and as I mentioned, these are mostly awarded to junior investigators. Their proposed studies can collect preliminary data, explore proof of concept, or entail developmental work that provides a clear pathway to future larger scale studies. We encourage applicants to use a variety of study designs, that is data for a future clinical trial, observational studies, or qualitative evaluation. The second mechanism is the grant planning award, and funding will be provided primarily but not exclusively to more established investigators. We want these funds to be used for grant planning activities that will lead to submissions of larger research proposals. So now you may be asking, what do I need to do to submit? I'll review some of the materials that you need to prepare. So first is the letter of intent. And for the first time this year, this is required. It should include a description of your research team, the aims, the approach you plan on taking, and then any grant planning activities. You should indicate if this is applicable to the priority areas that I described at the beginning, or, or I should say, that it relates to the aging initiative proposal that we'd like to fund. So would be both about deprescribing as well as multiple chronic conditions. It should include a description of your planned engagement with stakeholders, and it should explain any requests above the budget cap. So as far as the formatting for this, it should be 1 page in length. It should have 1/2-inch margins with 11-point Arial font. And I'd like to emphasize that these letters must be submitted through the website, through this portal on the right-hand side. You can see a screenshot by 11:59 Pacific time on Friday, November 12th, 2021. So this is a little bit earlier than in past years. So earlier and required, just to highlight some differences. Now look at the other requirements in submitting. So for both the pilot and grant planning awards, you'll submit a maximum of 5 pages, including the cover page that has the addresses, that addresses the study aims, the significance, the innovation, approach, future directions, and how stakeholders will be engaged. More details about these sections can be found at the request for applications on the USDN website. And complete applications are due at 11:59 Pacific time on Friday, January 28th, 2022. Additionally, if you're submitting a grant planning award, we would also like to know about the aims and approaches for the larger scale study that's being planned that would come after these grant planning award, and how the work will lead to grants, publications, and beyond. There's some also required supplemental materials. So we're asking for a 1/2-page project description that's in lay terminology for our stakeholder group to be able to understand, your NIH style bio sketch, the budget forms, which include a budget summary, budget justification, scope of work, and F&A rate agreement For junior investigators, we also ask for a one-page mentoring plan and a letter of support from your mentor or mentors. Finally, if you are a fellow or postdoc, just a confirmation that you'll be a faculty member at the beginning of the award period. We ask that you submit everything online through the network website, and you can see that the link is displayed here. Just to emphasize the key dates again. So the letter of intent, which is required, is due Friday, November 12th, 2021. The full application is due Friday, January 28th, 2022. Awards will be announced in early May, and the beginning of the funding cycle will be approximately August or September of 2022. So I'd like to now turn it over to our stakeholder engagement core that's going to talk more about the stakeholder engagement piece of your application. And I'd like to introduce Carmen Reyes, who works at the University of California, Los Angeles, and is one of the leaders of the stakeholder engagement core. Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, everyone. I'd like to draw your attention today on the section in the RFA, which specifically addresses the criteria for the stakeholder engagement piece. Before I do so, though, however, I'd like to mention that I do work with the Stakeholder Engagement Core alongside of Catherine Sarkeesian and Nicole Brandt. And we also convene a 12-member stakeholder group, council as we call them, composed of patients, caregivers, representatives from the health systems, as well as other representatives and advocates who also have a participating and active role in the review of the RFAs through this process. So going back to the criteria, I will highlight, because we feel it's a very important section of the RFA, the stakeholder engagement piece. And the stakeholder engagement is participation of at least one stakeholder, either in an advisory capacity or a full member of the research team is required. Stakeholders may include patients, caregivers, frontline clinical providers, healthcare system administrators, leaders, or others depending on the focus of the project. And I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that it's important to include a detailed description of your stakeholder or stakeholders, how they relate to the study topic in terms of their organizational affiliation is applicable, if applicable. Include background and relevant experience, motivation for participating, and in the projected activities. Describe how they will incorporate in meaningful engagement, active engagement, I think I would add that word, with one or more of the stakeholders in the stakeholder groups that informs of some aspect of the research process, including topic selection, study design, actually conducting of the research, and or final dissemination of results. Detailed how selected stakeholders and engagement goals intersect with the study aims and objectives, how stakeholders were or will be recruited, and also include in the budget compensation plans for that outlines how these stakeholders will be compensated for their time and their efforts. A timeline of stakeholders' expected study-related activities along with information about planned compensation for their involvement, which should be further specified in the budget plan and justification pages. Well, I added the last slide, which is some things to consider, think about as you went through this process. There may be some potential pitfalls here, perhaps like misidentifying all scientific, clinical research team as partners, as stakeholders. Sometimes we find that in the previous applications, we would see that many of the identified stakeholders were all partners of the scientific research team, which is acceptable, except that you would want to have some kind of blend of different types of stakeholders in the process. Lack of appropriate or no compensation, that's a critical piece. We want people to actually be acknowledged for their time and their activity in the project. And fully compensated for their time and efforts. Lack of a clear explanation of how the stakeholder connects to the project? What's their specific role, type, and level of direct involvement? And the last one, something to consider, a lack of varied stakeholder representation, which kind of applies to bullet number 1. There's also, I think the next slide, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, there's some very specific links that are embedded in the RFA that we strongly urge you to visit for more information around stakeholder engagement. There's an FAQ stakeholder sheet that was created. There are also some great links as PCORI and some other important information that if you need more information. And also I would urge you to review. And if you have any questions, you can share on the chat today or visit the USDeN website. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmen, for that excellent description and expectations around stakeholder engagement. So I'm going to move on to what the scoring criteria is for reviewing the applications. Each proposal is reviewed by 2 experts in deep prescribing, and they score the application based on the overall impact, innovation, scientific rigor, feasibility, as well as the investigators and environment, similar to the NIH review criteria. Additionally, we look at the potential for the project to lead to larger scale work, its relevance to aging, and relevance to any priority areas, as well as the budget. However, these last 2 categories do not get a score, but are considered by the reviewer. And now the awardees do have some expectations as well as resources available to them. So here we're showing resources available to our USDeN awardees in the middle column. And on the right-hand side are those that receive funding from the Aging Initiative. Specifically, we as the pilot core leaders will meet with the USDeN recipients quarterly, and they also have access to the stakeholder engagement core leaders as needed. There are optional USDeN webinars on a regular basis, as well as works in progress seminars. And there is access to the consulting service by which someone can pose a question that can be answered in approximately 1 hour of a USD Prescribing Network's expert's time. Other things that are expected of our awardees: at the end of the year, you will submit a progress report that details how well you have accomplished your aims, as well as any challenges you faced. And we ask for feedback about the process of being in the program itself. You'll present your work at the annual meeting. And then finally, years after you have participated in the program, we send you a yearly online survey to ask about your progress with grant proposals as well as publications. So I also wanted to mention another program that's supported by USDeN, the Junior Investigative Intensive Program, led by Dr. Jen Tija and Dr. Ken Bookbar of the Investigator Development Corps. They're seeking applicants for the 2022 year. Their program consists of monthly webinars by leading investigators, virtual works in progress sessions, career development activities at the annual meeting and throughout the year, in addition to all the USDeN resources. The request for applications is coming out soon, sometime this fall, and your applications will be due in early 2022. So stay tuned and visit the website for more information. I also wanted to let you know about USDeN's collaboration grants. These help to foster topic and site-specific collaborative efforts related to deep prescribing. They're small amounts of money, typically $500 to $5,000. And some examples of ideas are perhaps a mini summit of investigators or seed funding to bring investigators together who want to collaborate. These applications are brief and are reviewed on a rolling basis, so you're welcome to apply anytime now at the website. As I mentioned, we do have an annual meeting this year. It will be around the American Geriatric Society meeting in May. Specifically, our meeting for the USDeN will be the day before on Wednesday, May 11th, 2022 in Orlando, Florida. So mark your calendars and we look forward to seeing all of you there. I'll wrap up by saying please visit the USD Prescribing Research Network's website, which is pictured here, at deprescribingresearch.org, where you can find all sorts of great information. Thank you for your attention, and with that, we're happy to open it up for questions. We have Dr. Simmons from our core, as well as Carmen Reyes, who's representing the Stakeholder Engagement Core. And I believe for a few minutes, we have also Dr. Cynthia Boyd and Dr. Mike Steinman, who lead USDEN. I think Jonathan is going to prompt me with the questions.
Hi, Amanda. Yeah, our first question we have is regarding the priority areas. Is there additional info or somewhere to find additional info regarding what it means for point of care tools or to stop or reduce medications?
Yeah, great question. I mean, in general, I think point of care tools mean something that can be used in real time when a provider is seeing a patient, or a patient can utilize, any time that they're questioning the utility of their medication. So something that's useful right at the time in which care is being delivered. But that's fairly general and could apply to, I can imagine, a lot of different settings as well as different types of tools.
And our next question is for the pilot award. Can two applicants submit one grant as, I think, co-PIs if they're from different institutions?
So two people submitting a pilot award from different institutions. We haven't had that in the past, and typically these are for development of the investigator. So generally we have just had one person submit because it involves usually one or more mentors. And so I think probably that would not be allowed. We do allow for more than one person to apply for grant planning. As you can imagine, there's usually a team of people, of investigators who are working on, a larger project for grant planning purposes. But I would actually, since this is kind of a new question, I'll actually defer to Mike Steinman to see if there's anything specific about that.
Yeah, if you're interested in applying, I would just put that in your LOI. I think conceptually, it's great. I think, getting interdisciplinary and inter-institutional collaboration is a wonderful thing. It just creates a little things we need to work out on the back end for things like budgeting. So just put that in your LOI, and that way it'll just flag us to make sure that we can touch base with our grants management specialists and just be in touch with you about any budgeting issues that you just might need to be aware of in your application. But in principle, it's something we certainly welcome.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. Next, we have a couple of questions related to the LOI. Is the LOI used as a screening mechanism, or does everyone submit an LOI and the full page application?
Yeah, great question. So we have everyone submit the LOI, and everyone would submit the 5-page application, unless during the LOI submission stage we found some, piece of the application that we thought was, needed some feedback, and we do try to provide that. Sometimes there are questions posed at the LOI stage that we are happy to answer, but generally everyone who submits the LOI will also submit the application.
If I may expand on that, the reason why we're making the LOIs mandatory this year, where previously were required, or previously they were optional, is basically as a service to the applicants, even though it may not seem like that. And the reason is we don't want you to kind of be barking up the wrong tree. So if we see something in your LOI that feels like, hey, you're not really getting it, or maybe you need help with redirecting in a certain area. That's the goal, is to help you make your final application stronger. So don't take it of it as like a culling mechanism, but more as just an opportunity just to provide gentle redirection if it seems like for some reason you're steering way off in the wrong direction.
Thanks, Mike.
And the next question for LOIs is, do we have any sample LOIs that applicants could access?
Good question. We haven't, but I don't see why we couldn't post one on the website to show an example.
Great. And next, if you were named as an associate investigator on a pilot grant that was previously awarded, are you able to apply as a lead investigator in this round?
As far as I know, yes. There's no reason, if you were not the main awardee, that you couldn't apply for one this year.
That's all the questions I see for now. So if anyone else has questions, please enter them in the chat or the Q&A.
And Amanda, can I just stress one thing quickly about the stakeholder engagement piece?
Of course.
I was just thinking about this. So I just want to make sure that we were being super clear. Stakeholder engagement is really important to what we do. And we expect that a lot of people who are applying will not have done this before. So we're not expecting that you're going to have every last detail figured out and be an expert in stakeholder engagement. But we do want you to take it seriously and think about it. And if you have questions, please look at those resources and also reach out. It is an important part of the review process. It's something we take seriously. So again, you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to get it perfect, but you do need to make a really good faith effort to incorporate that meaningfully in your work. Catherine or Carmen, anything you guys want to add about that?
No, just to thank you for that, Mike. And Mike and Cynthia, they don't just talk the talk, they walk the walk. They truly care and value stakeholder engagement. And it's part of why Carmen and I and Nikki love working with this wonderful team. And we're excited to see a great batch of applications. And yeah, I agree. As Mike said, don't hesitate to reach out to Carmen or me if you have any questions, or Nikki about stakeholder engagement.
I'm seeing Jonathan just sent a quick message about anything to further clarify about aging versus USDeN funding. Sandra, Amanda, you want to say anything more about that? Would you like me to, or Cynthia?
I don't mind. So yes, so for the first time this year, we're sort of partnering with the Aging Initiative, and we've decided that we'd like to jointly fund one application that is going to address both deprescribing as well as multiple chronic conditions. And so if you think that your application applies to both of those areas, then please mark that, make it known in your LOI as well as your application, so that we look at that, specifically. This means that you can apply for both, obviously our award as well as the Aging Initiatives, but you can't receive both of them. This was really to try to have some synergy between our networks, and we're looking forward to the applications that can address both of those topic issues. I don't know, Mike or Cynthia, if you want to add anything more.
Thanks. I think the only thing I would say is just to be clear, actually, so we have both of our networks, so the Deprescribing Research Network and Aging have both committed to funding at least one application that deals with the intersection of deprescribing and multimorbidity. So we will fund one through USDeN, and Aging Initiative will separately fund one. So there's kind of two opportunities, and you can take the same proposal and submit it to both sites. But keep in mind that if you're lucky enough to get selected by both, we're going to talk with each other, and you won't get double funding to the same project. And there are some funding differences in terms of the amount of available dollars between our networks. So just be aware as you're doing that. And again, as Amanda said, the real goal here is, deprescribing is so intimately connected with multimorbidity. We just want the opportunity to make that explicit and form nice, strong partnerships with the aging network and vice versa. So if you think your thing is, and if it's related to multimorbidity, just like stakeholder, it needs to be meaningfully related to multimorbidity. You kind of got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So in your application, you need to talk meaningfully about what's, things that are conceptually important about multimorbidity and how that does relate to deprescribing. But again, certainly not every application needs to be related to multimorbidity, just like not every application needs to be on one of our pre-specified focus areas. If you've had a good idea that's going to lead to great future work and it's scientifically robust, we would love to see it.
Looks like there was another question related to stakeholder engagement. Can we incorporate a pre-existing CAB, or does it need to be new? I assume that CAB is like some kind of consumer advisory board, perhaps. So that's fine. You don't have to have a new entity included if you already have relationships with an established organization or group. Just explain how you're going to engage them in your research.
Agree.
I would just add, I'm sorry, Catherine, go ahead.
No, that was it. You go. I was just going to agree. I was looking for the thumbs up, but I don't have that technical option here.
I support exactly what Amanda said, and hopefully there will be some drawn lines of points of interest and why this particular CAB membership is interested in this project.
Any other questions from the folks watching? Well, Jonathan, is there anything else that we need to say before we wrap up?
Yes, this webinar is being recorded, and it should be up on the website, to reference, in the future, as well as the slide deck next week.
Great.
And
thank you, everybody, for attending.
Sorry, I'll say one more is just if you're not joining our network, please do. We send out monthly newsletters, which will keep you up to date on any new information for the network.
Absolutely. On the landing page for deprescribingresearch.org, if you click on the red button that says join, we promise not to spam you or anything, just good emails from Jonathan and the crew. Well, if you have further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we look forward to receiving your letters of intent and your full applications in the coming months. Thank you, everybody, for listening.